Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this lunchtime talk on the Introduction to Biodiversity Net Gain in the Intertidal Environment. My name is William Coulay, and next to me is Jack Cattermole, and we're with EXO Engineering International Limited. Our organization focuses on marine and freshwater eco-engineering, ensuring that the hard infrastructure can also become a habitat to rich biodiversity. So our presentation today will go over a few topics, but be very brief as a simple introduction, and then there will be a question and answer session at the back end of the meeting, and we'll be using Mentimeter. So hopefully you'll be able to join us on that as well. So just in a matter of framing this presentation, this is the construction of Hinkley Point C nuclear power station in Somerset, which we need for energy generation, but it's also a coastal location. And this coastal location has a rich biodiversity and is crucial for a stable ecosystem that's resilient to environmental changes. It's often overlooked that humans are part of biodiversity, yet, and particularly in this occasion, when humans are introduced to an area, biodiversity declines. And this shift in a delicate balance of biodiversity is obviously not what we want nationally. And with an increased awareness of this type of impacts and conscious efforts, we can work to readdressing the balance and achieving the best interests for humans and nature. First consideration for sustainability was in 1987 in the Bertrand Report, Our Common Future. And now we see the sustainability requirements for biodiversity net gain being legally required in an integral part of new development of projects under the planning framework. So it's a very interesting movement. I'll now pass to Jack to start introducing Biodiversity Net Gain.
Hi everyone. So as William mentioned, my name is Jack. I've been working with my colleagues to understand this new legislation, which will be coming in very shortly. And I've produced this presentation in correspondence with Natural England. So just to give a bit of an introduction, Biodiversity Net Gain will be introduced from November this year. And it will come into force under the Environment Act 2021. So in November 2021, the Environment Bill gained royal assent, becoming the Environment Act 2021, and a 2-year transition period was begun following this to prepare for the enforcement of this new legislation. This allowed for consultation with planning authorities to understand just how this is going to be implemented. And the legislation will apply to all developments which are in England, are occurring above the mean low water level and are greater than 25 meters squared in size. You'll notice that this just applies to developments in England. In Wales and Scotland, it's a slightly different story. There'll be no legal framework underpinning the legislation, but in Wales, there's still an overall aim to deliver improvements in biodiversity. And in Scotland, a national planning framework will be used for the same purposes to deliver that biodiversity gain. And the Environment Act 2021 modifies the existing legislation of the Planning Act 2008 and the Town and Country Planning Act. You'll also notice that it doesn't apply to subtidal developments. There is currently new legislation which is in the consultation period at the moment, which is marine net gain, and this will be expected to be implemented in the coming years. So just to give a bit more of an overview about what is required as part of biodiversity net gain. These are kind of the key principles which must be achieved. So at least a 10% biodiversity net gain must be achieved as part of development projects. And this can be achieved through habitat creation, enhancement, or through the purchase of biodiversity credits. And this gain must be sustained for at least 30 years. So I've included this graphic. It's quite self-explanatory. But you can see here we've got this habitat. It's being impacted to make way for this development. We've not got any kind of habitat creation or mitigation to maintain that habitat, so we've got a net loss. In the second example, we can see this habitat is being added back on at the end of the development, which will achieve a kind of a neutral, in the same position as we started with. And in the third example, we've got kind of an enhanced form of this habitat, as well as the integration of things such as green walls and roofs, which improve the biodiversity as part of the development. So to go over some key definitions now, a biodiversity gain plan must be submitted alongside your planning application, and this must be approved at the same time as the planning application for this to go ahead. This needs to be completed by a competent person, which will typically be an ecologist or someone who has experience with ecological surveys and things like that. So the Environment Act 2021 sets out that a biodiversity gain plan should explain how adverse impacts on habitats are being minimised and what different interventions are being used to enhance biodiversity as well. And this should be done, in regard to the mitigation hierarchy, which prioritises the avoidance of habitat disturbance and kind of uses off-site compensation as a last resort if this can't be achieved. Your biodiversity gain plan must also state the pre-development and the post-development biodiversity value, and these values can be calculated by applying different multipliers in the biodiversity metric calculation tool. So just to go over some of these multipliers, in terms of determining the pre-development biodiversity value, we first take the size of the habitat, which is measured in hectares, and we apply the following multipliers to it in regards to distinctiveness, condition, and strategic significance. So those with a bit more of an ecological background are probably aware of these terms, but for those who aren't, I'm just going to briefly explain what these mean. So habitat distinctiveness is a measure of how significant a habitat type is for biodiversity in a national context due to its rarity or other priority. Habitat condition is a measure of how habitat quality, and this usually relates to how well a habitat is being managed, but can also refer to structural features such as percentage cover of undesirable species. And strategic significance depends on whether a habitat parcel falls within a strategic biodiversity area which has been identified in local policy. And these must be determined by a competent person, which, as I've said, is typically an ecologist. So moving on to the post-development biodiversity value. This is in addition to the multipliers used to determine the pre-development biodiversity value, and these must be additionally considered when determining this. So we've got time to target condition, which is measured in years, and difficulty. These will both auto-fill, so you don't have to fill these out. These automatically fill out in the calculation tool. And then we've also got spatial risk. This applies to offsetting off-site compensation that way, and is typically determined based on the target habitat type. For example, if it's a more complex habitat, the difficulty would be higher. And in terms of the spatial risk, this is pretty much referring to the distance of this habitat mitigation from your development site. So I tried to design a graphic which represents how these multipliers interact with each other. So you can see here we've got the 4 multipliers which are used to determine the pre-development biodiversity value, multiply these all together, and then when we determine the post-development biodiversity value, we also account for these 3 additional multipliers: time to target condition, difficulty, and spatial risk. And then from this, we can subtract the pre-development biodiversity value from the post-development biodiversity value to give us our biodiversity unit change. And then from this unit change, we can calculate our biodiversity net gain percentage. So I'm going to pass back to William now. He's going to talk a little bit more about how relevant this is to interplaned ecology and the different opportunities for ecological engineering.
Yeah, no, thank you, Jack. That's a great explanation on how biodiversity net gain works and also how the metric will work. We have a more detailed presentation on the metric, one of our follow-up events you can subscribe to. So if that's of interest, please give that a look out. So I'll just highlight the problem as we kind of experience it in urbanized areas, and how we can then overcome certain challenges. So there is roughly 2 billion people globally living on the coastline worldwide, with urbanization more than doubling in these areas over the last century. You can see some examples here where this urbanization has an impact on the natural environment through ocean sprawl, where urban centers spread and move kind of into intertidal areas. And climate change adaptation means more hard defenses are also replacing natural habitats. We have a lot of sheer, smooth surfaces of artificial defenses that are a poor replacement for habitats for intertidal species. And then thirdly, there's coastal squeeze and sea level rise, where structures are moving further into the sea, and this obviously takes away some of the intertidal habitat. But this also creates an opportunity to integrate biodiversity inclusive design. So, and this is what we specialize in. And this is an example for rocky shore ecology, just to show what type of habitat features they offer. So you're talking about fish nurseries, a habitat for many refuges, for a range of species across different intertidal zones. So it could be crabs kind of sheltering juvenile fish and various of invertebrates. There's many pools and ledges, crevices that provide water retention, shade and cooling, and prevention of desiccation and heat stress. There's obviously a plentiful food for seabirds, and key habitat for many kind of different species, from limpets to mussels and sabellaria reefs. So what we want to do is recreate some of these kind of rocky shore ecology into our hard infrastructure, and we can do this through integrated greening of grey infrastructure, as kind of highlighted in the Biodiversity Net Gain legislation. So from our sheer and smooth surfaces, we can create rock pools, create holy habitats, pits and grooves, and various protrusions to make these habitats more suitable for that wide-ranging species. There's a lot of research gone into what type of features are good, and there is a good report on greening the grey by Naylor et al., but also good information on conservation evidence of Cambridge University that affirms that the inclusion of a variety of features is beneficial for biodiversity. And in relation to habitat type, when you look at the biodiversity metric, is that intertidal hard structures have double the distinctiveness score instead of 2. So when you look at a sheer smooth surface, you might only receive 2 points, whilst if you include integrated greening of grey infrastructure, you'll receive 4 points, so a double the score for habitats. So this is a seawall example, and you can see it's a sheer wall. It's smooth as well, and very kind of little opportunities there for diversity and habitats. So what we propose to do with these surfaces is to create rock pools, ledges, holes, and a variety of habitat opportunities that can be included there. We can offer this through retrofitting or as a new build as well. And we'd like to think that for each environment, we can offer a specific kind of range of solutions that are suitable to that environment. So thank you so much for joining us in this presentation. I'd like you to join us at the Menti questionnaire as well, if you could spare another few minutes, and we can go into a few questions of our own, and there will be plenty of time for question and answers as well, where we can run through some of your critical questions and see if we have an answer. So our first question is, in one word, how is biodiversity net gain kind of relevant to you? I can imagine that some of the people on the call have a project that might have to go through planning, or the planning consultants, environmental consultants, or perhaps work for an environmental organization. I seem to be struggling trying to get onto Menti. We've got one. I have one contractor on board. That's great to have you on board. Sorry, I missed you off on the first time. So the biodiversity net gain legislation will impact different people if it's terrestrial type development or coastal. It could obviously be a range of those. And in this presentation, we mainly focused on intertidal solutions and challenges, but we'd like to think that similar solutions can be applied to freshwater ecology as well. Great. Well, I'll move on to the next question. If that works. So, if you wouldn't mind rating your knowledge on biodiversity net gain, and hopefully today we've made a little bit of a difference in providing you with an introduction. As mentioned, there is another webinar on the biodiversity metric 4, where we'll give you a full run through of the metric, so you can see how that works and try to implement it yourself. Right, so confidence is not particularly high at the moment on knowledge. Hopefully we have made a bit of a difference today. And let's see if we can answer some of these questions that you may have to increase that knowledge. So are there any questions? You're welcome to type them in or use your microphone to ask us a question as well. Yeah, so we have a bit more of a statement than a question. Multipliers are worrying for monetary alignment. Yes, I guess I can agree with that. I can see where you're coming from. The metric is a bit of a model where they have to take into account anything in biodiversity, whilst some of the systems are relatively complex. Jack, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, when I initially saw that, I was trying to think how it kind of applies, but of course you're kind of losing that sediment, and you're encouraged to try and mitigate that loss in a lot of situations. So yeah, I would agree that it's definitely a concern, because you can only do so much to stop the loss of habitats when you're managing the coastline kind of.
Yeah, I guess with monetary alignment, assuming you're looking to flood an area where you have a habitat loss, and then reintroducing another type of habitat, I would assume that with the habitat introduction, if you introduce salt marsh, it will be a high distinctiveness level that would score higher than, for example, agricultural land. But at the same time, if there is a high value grazing marsh, it could score relatively high as well. So yeah, it'd be a really good case study to have a look over and in a sense play around with the metric to see how you can get your scoring to work. Yeah, similarly, I'm sure there is lots of coastal defense projects that are critical for urban areas that, yeah, cause a bit of a headache when you have to calculate biodiversity net gain. So is the biodiversity net gain calculator tool easily accessible for trial? Yes. So currently the tool is the metric 4. You can download from the Natural England website, and you can use that already. So there's no limitations on that. Is that right?
Yeah, I believe so. And as Williams mentioned, we are doing a run through of how the biodiversity metric 4.0 can be used in our next talk. So if you are interested in that, I would suggest going over to our Eventbrite page and yeah, having a look on there.
For the past couple of months, we've been corresponding with Natural England with various challenging questions about the metric and about various case studies that we've introduced to see how this works and how they kind of see us using the metric. So I think we've gained a lot of experience in doing multiple case studies and asking kind of difficult questions. And I think for Natural England themselves, it's been really interesting to see, in particular in relation to integrating grey infrastructure, how that actually works and how we can implement it. So yeah, if you have any questions, please do get back to us via email or any ways that we can help. We'd be happy to get involved.
So I'm just going to pick up on this third question. What other consents than planning permission are needed? What role must these other regulators have?
Yeah, so the legislation is coming into the planning framework. So it's mainly the planning framework that would be concerned with this. So MMO wouldn't necessarily be directly concerned with it. And if there is an intertidal habitat, the MMO would consult with the local planning authority for that. So similarly to the Environment Agency, there would be a consultee within the local planning framework. So the local planning authority would consult with the EA as well as with the harbour authority, I would assume. So because of the legislation coming into the planning framework, it's really the planning authority that deals with it, and not necessarily MMO harbour authorities. There would be then a consultee. Hopefully that answers your question. Any other questions that might be relevant? Anything at all? Okay, well, if you think of any questions after this talk, then please email us and we'll try to pick them up. Some of the challenging questions that we didn't have immediate answers for, we've actually passed to Natural England, who's been really helpful. So let us know if you get stuck and we'll try to help. And thank you so much for attending this talk, and we'll then wrap up.
Just to let you know, we are recording this as well. I'm not sure if we've decided how we're going to make that available. We can put it on our website or
we'll probably on our YouTube channel.
Okay, so feel free to head on over. That might be up in a few days' time.
All right then, have a good afternoon and enjoy the rest of your lunch. Bye then.
Thank you.
Thank you.